Tonight's entertainment is presented by Peter Lucas, who happens to be in the top left-hand corner of my screen. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening.
This is about South Australian light railways. I believe there's something like about 600 light railways in South Australia, and there's, only a handful left. But I won't tell you any more about it, and I'll hand you over to Peter. Thank you.
Right. Hopefully, just let me get up my slideshow.
Sure. I need to pick another window. Peter.
Yeah, I've just got to minimize that and find the window. Just a minute. No, that's not it. Sorry, I'm having a bit of trouble just getting the window up.
That's okay, Peter. Just take your time. It's no problem.
Too many windows at the moment. No point.
There it is.
Okay, and there we go.
Just maximise that.
Again.
Okay.
Yep.
You're in business. Yep, you're in business.
All right. Well, good evening. My name is Peter Lucas. I'm speaking from Clayton Bay, which is about an hour south of Adelaide on the River Murray. My involvement in light railways is mainly because of the Railway Museum, which I'm involved in. South of Adelaide, now south of Adelaide, there is a museum called the Malang Railway Museum, which I'm sure most of you have never heard of. It's a great little place to visit. There's a photo of it there. You can see the original Malang railway station on the right, and some of the locos and rolling stock we've got parked there. And that museum opens every weekend afternoon. Now, 8 years ago, we decided to extend the museum by building what we now call the South Australian Light Railway Centre. That's the white building you can see on the left-hand side there with a circle around it. And the intention of that building is to tell the story of the state's light railways, obviously. And that's what this is about tonight. Now, South Australia had 700 light railways at one stage, in its lifetime. We know that because one of our local members, Les Howard, put an awful lot of work into building a spreadsheet in which he's listed all 700 light railways. Not just listed them, but included a lot of detail, gauges, map locations, what they did, locos, all that kind of thing. So that's a huge resource we've had on which we can base the stories which we tell in our light railway centre. In that map there, you can see how the light railways were distributed around the state. A lot of them are jetty tramways, obviously because of the extensive coastline that South Australia has. And boats were a major means of transportation, and hence jetties at each township and a jetty tramway. Sadly, only 9 of those railways still remain, and I'll mention them later on. Now, in our light railway centre, we have a big map up on the wall of the state and an enlarged bit of Adelaide. And on that map, we've got 700 pins that have been carefully put there in each location of each light railway. And those pins are 12 different colours, each colour representing a different type of light railway. And those are how we classified them, which I'll come on to later. That's one of the walls in our light railway centre. And you can see we put together a storyboard on each type of light railway. And each storyboard has got a border the colour of which corresponds to the pins in the map. So our visitors can go and read a story about a particular type of light railway, and then can go to the map and see where that type was located. We also have a little train running in the foreground on that green bit, which is very popular with the kids. Right, let's talk about the different kinds of light railways now. I'll start by talking about the different kinds of power that was used for the light railways. Starting off with the obvious one, which is 1 horsepower. That particular picture was taken on the Malang Jetty tramway. Malang is on Lake Alexandrina, and boats came down the river, River Murray, to Malang. They would offload their goods onto that tramway. That horse pulled the wagons up to the station where they load the trains to go to Adelaide. So Malang was all about the transportation of goods, supplies going from Adelaide upriver, and produce coming the other way. And around about 1880, Malang was the second busiest harbour in South Australia. But unfortunately, it all fell apart because they then built the railway to Morgan, which is shorter still, and Malang lost most of its business overnight. And it's now the nice little place it is today. Now, that horse, that photo was taken in early 1930s or maybe late 1920s. And it shows the horse, whose name was Nugget. And beside it is Reuben Coppins, his driver. The gauge is 3'6" gauge. And it's interesting to note that Reuben died in 1934 and the horse Nugget died the very next day. So they went together. So that's 1 horse tramway. Here's the second one. This one is north of Adelaide at Dry Creek. Its purpose was to move explosives from the Department of Chemistry building to ketches that were moored at Dry Creek. The vans contained explosives, obviously, and 4 of those vans still exist. One has been restored at the National Railway Museum, Port Adelaide. One is up at Cobdogla in the Riverland, and 2 are at the Illawarra Light Railway Museum over in New South Wales, and they have both been restored as well. Next, another couple of horse tramways. Now, these are passenger carrying. As far as I know, these are the only 2 passenger carrying light railways in South Australia. The left-hand one was at Port Broughton. There was a tramway going from Port Broughton, which is on the Gulf, up to Mundura, up a hill to Mundura, which was 10 miles away. It's 3'6" gauge, and the way it worked was that the horse pulled that coach and a wagon up to Mundura, and then they loaded the horse into the wagon, and then the whole lot returned to Port Broughton by gravity, hopefully with an efficient brake. The right-hand one, the right-hand tramway, still exists today. That's at Victor Harbour, which is about an hour and a quarter south of Adelaide. It runs from Victor Harbour to Granite Island over a causeway, and it's very popular with tourists. That operates much of the year round, and it's actually 5'3" gauge, which is unusual. The reason for the gauge is because it's actually an extension of the main line which came down from Adelaide to Victor Harbour, and it was extended through onto the causeway. So that one is operating today. Now, the next step up from horsepower is camel power. We only had 1 of these as far as I know. This is on the Transcontinental Railway to Perth. When they were building it, they obviously used steam locos to move everything around. And those steam locos needed good water, of which there's a very short supply on the Nullarbor Plain. There's some bad water, but not good. So they had to construct a distillation plant to prepare the water. And that distillation plant was powered by steam and needed a fuel, which of course was timber. There was no timber in the close vicinity of the railway, so they built an 11-kilometre long tramway to Oudlia, where they collected the timber for the fuel. And that tramway was propelled by camels, as you can see. Then now we'll move on to steam. Got 3 steam locos here. The one in the top right-hand corner is a Decauville locomotive. It's a French design, made in Germany in 1913. They purchased 2 of these, and they operated at Tailem Bend, which is about an hour and a quarter east of Adelaide, where there's now a big racing track. Those locomotives operated until the 1930s. There were 2 of them. And in the mid-1930s, they were just dumped because they were replaced by jetty tractors, and they just dumped the locos there. Enthusiasts came and took bits off, and gradually the locos fell apart and eventually disappeared. We have actually recovered 3 pieces of those locos. We have 2 cylinders from the loco in the picture there, and also 1 axle with wheels from that loco. The works plate for the loco is at the National Railway Museum, and we've created a replica of that works plate, which is on display down at Malang. The locomotive on the left was at the Wallaroo mines, and it's a Hudswell Clark loco. I believe there's a few of those around the place. There's one over in Victoria, I believe, and there's one up in the Northern Territory at the Adelaide River Railway Museum, which actually ran not too long ago in 2010. So that's an 042 locomotive, as you can see, which was used at the Moonta mines. We'll talk about those mines later on. The one on the right was made by Perry Engineering of Adelaide. Perry made a limited number of narrow gauge locomotives, I think around about 22, and most of those were used on the sugarcane railways up in Queensland. Several of them still exist. One is on static display in the National Railway Museum. One has been restored to running order at Cobdogla in the Riverland, and I believe there's a few more over in New South Wales and Queensland. Perry Engineering mainly made standard gauge locomotives or broad gauge locomotives, but they did make those 20-odd narrow gauge as well. Now, talking of Cobdogla and the Riverland, they also had this locomotive. This locomotive is a Bagnall number 1901. It was built in 1906 in Stafford in the UK and was purchased for £390. It started life in Victoria, where it was used on a construction project. And when that was finished, it was sold to the South Australian government to help build a breakwater at Glenelg on the Adelaide coastline. Now, those of you from Adelaide will probably think, hang on, there's no breakwater at Glenelg, and you're right, because apparently they built it, but it then got washed away, so the whole thing was a waste of time. When the breakwater project was finished, it was sold to South Australian Water at Cobdogla in the Riverland, where they had a large irrigation project. It worked there until retirement in 1947. So the upper right photo is when it was in Victoria, when it was at Glenelg. The bottom left one was taken only a few years ago when it was operating at Cobdogla. The bottom right one, the very sad picture there, was in the 1956 flood, when the loco turned out to be parked in the wrong place. However, they did manage to recover it and got it running, as you can see in the left-hand picture. They converted it to oil firing, and it's in running condition today, although at the moment the Cobdogler Museum is closed at the moment. So that's steam. Now let's move on to internal combustion, where we've got some real beauties here. Now, firstly, the top right-hand one is a Fortune jetty tractor, which was used at Port Price at the top of the York Peninsula. There were two of them. The Fortune tractors were built at Dagenham in the UK. One of them is built in 1940. I'm not sure about the other one. And when they came out here, they were installed on a Malcolm Moore chassis from Victoria, and were used at Port Price to move salt wagons from the salt pans to the jetty and back again. And I'll talk some more about that later on. The bottom right-hand picture is a neat little job of work. That was taken at Muston Salt Lake on Kangaroo Island, and they needed a ganger's trolley, so they took a wagon, installed a Triumph motorcycle engine with a chain drive, and that became their ganger's trolley. The elegant looking locomotive on the left is fairly unique. At Mulgundawa, which is about half an hour away from me here, there was a big salt pan there, owned by Jack Balfour, and he was using steam power to drive his wagons, and then decided one day he needed to change to internal combustion. So he took a wagon, installed a 1927 Chevrolet petrol engine in it, added chain drives and so on, and off it went, pulling his salt wagons. Unfortunately, it couldn't pull very much because it was too light. So you can see how he solved that problem. He got two large drums, filled them with water, and put them on top. So that, in the end, produced an effective locomotive that was used for several years. But it isn't exactly the most elegant locomotive you've ever seen. Another locomotive on the same lines is this next one, which you will instantly recognize was based on a Morris Minor. Familiar bonnet. This is was at a place called Finnis, which is 10 minutes away from me here. There was a gentleman named Mr. Sorrell, who's still alive, who lives in Strathalbyn. And he lived at Finnis and wanted to start a quarry. And to make his quarry work, he had to drain a lot of water, which he did by building levee banks. To build the levee banks, he needed to have a railway. So he hired some track, he hired a number of skips, as you can see there, and they were used to move the spoil to make the levee banks. Now, he needed something to propel the train, and hence he took a Morris Minor, a scrap one, removed the road wheels and replaced them with railway wheels. Now, that sort of worked, but it kept derailing at bends because it was a rigid chassis. So he solved that in the top right-hand picture by replacing the back axle with a bogie, a four-wheel bogie, which he manufactured himself and connected up the prop shaft. And that did solve the problem. It allowed the train to go around the curves without derailing, and he used it for a number of years. As you can see, he also constructed himself a very luxurious driver's seat there. We'd love to reproduce that locomotive for the museum today, so if anybody knows of a scrap Morris Minor, could you let us know, please? Now, let's go on to more civilized locomotives. The bigger companies purchased off-the-shelf diesel locomotives. The top right-hand corner shows a Russ & Hornsby 48 horsepower diesel locomotive built in 1938. Um, that locomotive still exists, and it was donated to the National Railway Museum, and they have sent it down to Milan. They sent it down about, must be 10 years ago now. And we then restored it over a period of 18 months, so it's now in full running condition. There is a bigger Ruston diesel on the bottom right-hand side. That was built in the early 1950s, and you see it's still O4O, but it has a jack shaft drive and air brakes. That locomotive is up at the Sherwood Log Museum in the Barossa Valley at the moment. And apparently it has been restored and it runs up on jacks. Going back to the Ruston Hornsby at Milan, we restored it, got it running about 8 years ago. And I have a video here of one of the first times it ran. Just let me get it going. You're just checking for all the leaks. And the other guy is checking out the horn. So he engages reverse gear. And pulls the lever to engage the clutch. So that locomotive is still running today. We do demonstration runs with it. We had a model railway show a couple of weeks ago and we ran it there just for demonstrations. We're not allowed to pull passenger trains with it because it hasn't got the right safety equipment. There's no dead man's handle. So moving on from there, we get to electric power. And this is actually featured in the current issue of the magazine. That locomotive there were two of them, built by Perry Engineering of Adelaide, and they operated at the BHP limestone quarry at Rapid Bay, which is south of Adelaide. I presume the extra roofs there were to protect the loco in the event of falling rock from the quarry. So that's the different kinds of propulsion that we used in South Australia. Now let's go on and look at the different types of light railway we had, which we've classified like that. We'll start with amusement railways. The top right-hand railway is operating today at Semaphore. It's on the beach west of the city centre in Adelaide, and it's owned by the National Railway Museum, and they operate tourist rides up and down the beach at Semaphore. And apparently it makes them quite a good bit of money too. It is, I believe, 15-inch gauge, that one. On the left-hand side, we've got the railway that used to be at the Adelaide Zoo. Judging by the hats, I would say that's probably 1920s or maybe 1930s. The locomotive was petrol-powered and gave kids rides around the zoo and was very popular, but it's not there today. The lower right photo is at the Moonta Mines, which is top of the York Peninsula. They have a tourist railway there. Now that locomotive is actually the same one, I believe, as was at the zoo. But it's been rebuilt with a new bodywork to look more like a steam engine. The wagons, the coaches behind are actually munitions wagons, and we'll talk about them later on. They've been converted to carry passengers. That railway is well worth a visit. I believe it operates every day, has a commentary, and it's about 20 minutes long, and it tells you all about the history of the mines at Moonta. There are also some amusement railways in Adelaide City. on top of some of the main stores. The last one was Dazzleland at the top of the Mire building, which closed in 1996. A little while ago, we were donated some negatives, which we turned into positives, and but we don't know where that amusement railway is. If anybody recognises it, could they please let us know? We haven't identified it. So that's amusement railways. We'll now go on to agriculture. Now here we have a monorail. There were two of these, one at Loxton on agricultural use and the other on a salt pan up near Port Augusta. As you can see, there's just a single rail at the bottom there. The wagon has just two wheels, one at front, one at back, and there is a driver's seat at the back. The horse provides two functions. It propels the vehicle and it also provides balance to stop it falling over. So on the face of it, that's a very efficient and cheap way of building a light railway. Unfortunately, it wasn't very popular because it was a big hassle turning it around at each end. You had to unhook the horse, turn it round, couple it up again, move the seat to the other end, because of course horses can't go backwards any kind of distance. So that was it's called a Cayley system. It's a French invention. Next, we'll move on to mining. Now, we had a lot of mines in South Australia and still do, particularly up near Broken Hill. But this particular mine was in the Flinders Ranges, about 500 kilometres north of Adelaide. It's a barite mine, B-A-R-I-T-E. I'm not sure what barite's used for, but there was a mine and they dug a lot of it out. In the top right-hand picture, you can see a compressed air-powered rail-mounted excavator, which was used to dig the barite out of the mine walls. The barite was loaded into those skips, and the battery loco was used then to move the skips out of the mine to that loading point in the bottom right-hand photo, where the wagons were tipped and the barite fell down into a truck which was below that platform. The one thing I can't understand about these photos is, if you worked in a mine, why would you wear a nice white shirt? Seems a bit crazy. Next one is quarries. Two examples here. The left-hand one is Martin's Slate Quarry at Wollonga in 1908. There's a 2-foot gauge railway there, which went from the quarry to the cutting area. So they lower the slate into that, move it to the cutting area where it was cut up into the slates that were used for roofing and so on. The right-hand one is at Stonyfell, which is in the eastern suburbs of Adelaide now. The photo was taken in 1895, and that tramway is gravity powered. There's two wagons. One you can see at the bottom here, and there's one at the top. Now the one at the top, they applied a brake and they loaded that with stone from the quarry. The two wagons were connected by a cable. They released the brake and the loaded wagon with its weight started to proceed downhill, and in doing so it pulled up the empty wagon up to the top. And halfway up the tracks separated so that the two wagons could pass each other. Another quarry was the one I mentioned earlier, the BHP quarry at Rapid Bay, which initially used horses but then switched to electric. Next we'll get on to munitions. There was a very large munitions depot at Smithfield, north of Adelaide. We had a munitions factory at Salisbury, also north of Adelaide. They made the bombs and bullets and things. They loaded them into a broad gauge train that went up to Smithfield, where they then unloaded them into the kind of narrow gauge train you see there, and that's 2-foot gauge. The Smithfield depot was very extensive. It actually had 45 kilometres of track. And that track was laid in wartime at the rate of 380 metres a day, which is pretty phenomenal compared with today's rates of doing things. The wagons you see in the photo were built at Islington, which is in Adelaide, in 1940. The locomotive is a BEV, a battery electric vehicle, made in Liverpool in 1942. And there were actually 4 of those. And one is now down at Malang, where we use it on our train rides. One is at the Alexandra Timber Tramway in Victoria, one in New South Wales, and one in Queensland. But the Malang one is the only one that's operating at the moment. A strange thing about the battery loco is that you see it's it's not an 040, it's an 0220. Is that right? Yes. There's no coupling rod. Now, it was actually delivered with coupling rods, but they removed them for some reason, probably for safety reasons, because the rotating coupling rods could strike something metal and create sparks and set off an explosion. I'm guessing that's the reason. But anyway, they were removed soon after delivery and ran like that, which must have reduced their tractive effort. The buildings in the background are 2 different types. The near building is I suppose, a low-risk building in that they put in there explosives that weren't very explosive. It's just a brick building with no particular protection around it. To the right of it, you can see a high-risk building where they've stored the high explosive, and that's surrounded by an embankment, so that if there was an accident, the blast would go upwards and not set up a chain reaction with the other buildings. The Smithfield Munitions Depot closed in 1999, and very soon after it closed, the local branch of the Light Railway Society was allowed to have a tour of the Smithfield Depot, and that's what you're going to see now. There you can see the 5-foot-3 gauge railway crossing the 2-foot gauge. And that was some of our members at the time, including Les Howard. What we love about this video is the complete absence of rail safety regulations. There's no way in the world we could let our 10-year-old girls stand up in our wagons these days. And here they're on their way down to one of those high-risk buildings. And they're going to go through that tunnel through the embankment. Okay, so that's munitions. When the Smithfield depot closed, we purchased the battery loco, 4 wagons, a kilometre of rail, a battery charger, and 20 points, all 2-foot gauge. Incidentally, if anybody's looking for 2-foot gauge points, we may possibly have some to spare. We've got quite a stock of them. All right, let's move on to wineries now. 5 wineries had a railway, a light railway. They included Aldana and Dorian in the Barossa Valley, Seven Hill in Clare, and Tatachilla in McLaren Vale. The light railways were used for general purposes to bring in the grapes, move the barrels and the bottles, but also, as you can see in the photo, they were used to move basket presses. The grapes were put into that press, squashed, the liquid extracted, and then they removed the iron rings, dismantled the press and removed all the rubbish, and then that railway went off to pick up another load. Next one is brickworks. Now, this was a very common use of light railways in South Australia. There were 27 brickworks. This particular one is at Berry in the Riverland, where they would hand dig the clay, load it into skips. They then connected the skips up to a cable, which then pulled the skips up into the brickworks where the bricks were then produced. There were lots of those brickwork railways. One of them was at Torrensville in what is now the Adelaide suburbs. And that in the foreground is their locomotive. It was donated to the National Railway Museum in 1968, and they re-gauged it from 2 foot to 1.5 feet and used it for amusement rides. It's now on static display in the National Railway Museum. And that's another photo of it there. The next application is timber. Timber, of course, was a major resource in South Australia, being used to power steam engines all over the place. This photo is at Waikerie, taken in 1917, where the timber has arrived on steamboats and is offloaded onto wagons, which are then moved on that 2-foot gauge tramway up to a pumping station, which was used to drive all the irrigation channels. Next one we'll get to is salt and gypsum. Now, I touched on this earlier. This is at Stenhouse Bay, bottom of the York Peninsula. And we see there our Ruston diesel locomotive on the left. And the locomotive on the right is a Deutsch tractor conversion. They laid loose panels, track panels, out above onto the salt, out to where they were going to do their digging. And those locos were then used to bring the salt down to the jetty where they loaded. There was a conveyor belt which loaded the ships. There are still a loco and wagons on the cliff top at Stenhouse Bay, which are heavily rusted now. That Deutsch tractor is actually at the Sheok Log Museum in the Barossa Valley. Next one we'll get on to is another salt and gypsum operation, which was at Port Price, top of the York Peninsula. Now, I mentioned earlier there were 2 jetty tractors there. This is the other one, which is on loan from the National Railway Museum, and it's down at Malang. We again have restored it to full operation. We don't actually run it for 2 reasons. Firstly, we don't have a 3-foot 6 gauge railway, and secondly, because the gearbox is dodgy and it wouldn't handle much of a run. But we do start it roughly once a month, start the engine just to keep it in trim. But it's a pig to start. It requires 2 people, one to turn the handle and one to work the controls, and is generally a pretty unpleasant beast. That loco moved salt and gypsum from the salt pan to the Port Price jetty. There's a good story of this about this particular tractor, because it was built in 1940 at Dagenham outside London. Now at Dagenham there's a big Ford factory that made hundreds of these tractors, and they painted them all orange, which was their factory colour. And they parked them outside the factory waiting for delivery. So we had a massive orange tractors outside the factory. Then in 1940 they realised that the Germans were using it as a navigation aid to find London, the massive orange. So from then on they painted their tractors green so the Germans couldn't see them. That particular tractor was actually one of the last of the orange ones, but it was painted yellow when it came out here. This is another video. This is of Port Price and of the salt tramway in operation. Two locos there. The green one is still up at Port Price, and the yellow one is the one I've been talking about. The salt was hand dug, loaded into bags. The bags were loaded onto the train. The train brought them down to the jetty. And the bags were then loaded one by one into a ketch. The ketch went down to Adelaide, where they were unloaded to wherever they had to go in Adelaide. Lots of manhandling. Nowadays, of course, they just send a truck out to the salt pan. The salt is dug mechanically and the truck goes straight to its destination. We believe that video is probably the 1960s, judging by the cars which are up there. As you can see, it employed a lot of people. That jetty is still there today at Port Price. And here we can see the ketch on its way down to Adelaide. Right, let's now go on to industrial use. Sorry, I've gone one too far. This is another salt and gypsum one. This one is at Salt Lake on Kangaroo Island. There was a tramway from Salt Lake to Muston Jetty. The locomotive there is a Kerr, Stewart and Company loco built in the UK, and it was able to pull 4 5-ton wagons of salt. It was replaced with a jetty tractor in 1938. Now we'll go on to industrial use. The photo on the right, would you believe, is the Holden car factory in 1924. At that time, Ford were making 700 wooden-bodied cars a week, which required, therefore, a lot of wood. The wood was imported, and they had an extensive light rail system outside the factory, which was used to unload and move and sort the timber around, and then to push it into the factory to make the car bodies. The photo on the left is the Bennett's Pottery in McGill, which happens to be the street I live on. And that is in operation right now. As far as I know, it's the only industrial light railway still operating in South Australia. They use the railway and the wagons you can see there to move the pots around the place into furnaces and back out again and into storage and so on. So that is still operating to today. If you go and knock on their door, they are very happy to show you around that light railway. Now we get on to more exciting stuff. South Australia, of course, is the home of Woomera rocket range, where a lot was happening in the 1950s. In the early 1950s, Russia had detonated its first atomic bomb, and it had produced bombers that were capable of carrying that atomic bomb to Britain and blowing up Britain. So Britain needed an anti-aircraft missile to shoot those bombers down. So they came up with a plan which involved building a whole load of bunkers up the east coast of Britain. And into those bunkers, they would store the anti-aircraft missile, which you can see in the photo, the main photo. They intended to transport the missiles on a 2-foot gauge light railway, which went into each bunker. So the missiles were in there. They would load them onto that vehicle you can see. I guess you call it a locomotive. It's a sort of dual-purpose locomotive. It's battery powered. You can just about see a driver's seat on the left-hand side under the nose of the missile. So the driver would climb into the seat. He would drive the whole vehicle out of the storage bunker, out to the launch position. He would elevate the ramp, run like hell, and they would fire the missile. Then he'd get back in the seat, drive the vehicle back into the bunkers to get the next missile. Well, that was the plan, and that's what they tested at Woomera, using the setup you can see there. Unfortunately, it didn't work out, and they ended up mounting the missiles on trucks, and the missile system became the Thunderbird system, which was used by the British Army for many years. The vehicle in the top right-hand corner is a utility battery-powered vehicle, which they just used to move things around at Woomera on that 2-foot gauge track. Next, we'll move back on to jetty tramways. This is another view of the jetty at Malang. As you see, because the lake was so shallow, the jetty had to be very long. So the photographer is still on the boat, which has just arrived. The passengers have got off, and you see those ladies making their way down the jetty. They've got quite a long walk to get to the town, which you can see in the background there. However, they didn't have to carry their bags, because they would load the bags onto the wagon you can see on the left-hand side. Reuben Coppins is loading that wagon, and his horse Nugget is watching Reuben to wait for the signal to come and collect the wagon and take it up to the town. So it was a very long walk for the passengers, but for some reason, they didn't carry passengers on the wagon, except for one occasion. In 1881, Prince Albert and Prince George visited South Australia. They were Queen Victoria's grandsons. They spent a week touring Adelaide, and then they were invited to go shooting across the other side of Lake Alexandrina at the weekend. They were invited to go and shoot kangaroos. So they got a coach and horses down from Adelaide to Malang. They were welcomed by the local population, a couple of speeches, and the locals thought it would be good if they didn't have to walk down to the jetty. So they took that wagon and they put 2 armchairs on it and decorated it with bunting, and that became Malang's royal train, pulled by the horse. And we're aiming to reproduce that at the Railway Museum in our new extension. As you saw earlier, there are lots of jetty tramways in South Australia. This is the other kind. This is on the coast, where of course the water gets much deeper, much quicker. So the jetties could be much shorter. And in this case, it was horizontal, so the wagon was just hand pushed on and off the jetty. And that is at Second Valley, which is south of Adelaide. Next, we get to construction. This is in the mid-1930s, and the Onka-Paringa River Dam was built, and the Mount Bold Reservoir. They had 2 light railways there, which you can see in the photo. The left-hand one was used to move stone to make concrete. It's powered by a converted tractor, which you can see on the left-hand side there. The right-hand light railway was used to take the spoil away. Wagons went downhill under gravity with the horse in a wagon at the back. That horse you can see there. The wagons were emptied down the bottom, and then the horse would then pull the empty wagons, back up the hill to the position you see there. Another major construction in South Australia was the locks on the Murray River. This is Lock 1 at Blanchetown in 1922, under construction. The locomotive you see there is an American Baldwin loco, 3'6" gauge. There is actually an identical loco, nicknamed Sandfly, which built the Northern Australian Railway and is now on display at a motor museum in Darwin, been fully restored. Another construction still on the Murray was at the bottom of the Murray. They built the Goulburn barrages to stop the seawater coming into the Lake Alexandrina and stop the fresh water getting out, or being controlled anyway. That picture was taken in the late 1930s, and they used a 2-foot gauge railway to move the spoil to make the levee banks required by the barrages. The next photo is brings us almost to the present day. You may recall that in 2009 there was a major drought in South Australia, and Adelaide went very short of water. So they decided then to build a desalination plant, which was constructed in 2011. It was built in a cliff top on the Adelaide coast. They built it using a light railway, and that light railway was constructed. They dug a vertical hole down from the surface, and that entire railway system was lowered down the hole, and the railway was then constructed underground, which you can see there. As far as I know, that was the last use of a light railway for construction in South Australia. Now let's move up to the present day. I mentioned the South Australian Light Railway Centre at Malang. That's the shed you can see on the left there. And it's a pretty busy place at weekends. It's certainly grown in popularity. We get about 100 passengers a weekend. We give them free train rides. And you can see there in the foreground is the battery loco that you saw earlier. Only now we fitted it with coupling rods. When we bought the loco, there was a coupling rod on the wall up at Smithfield, which we acquired and used that as a pattern to make the coupling rods, which now function on the locomotive. The wagons also came from Smithfield. They're munitions wagons that we've converted to carry people using Adelaide bus seats and put a roof on board, on top. So that operates every weekend afternoon. Behind is a Fowler steam locomotive, built in Leeds in the UK in 1927. And that worked its life up in Mackay in Queensland on the sugarcane railways, moving the cane trains. In 1970, it was retired and put into a playground on the foreshore at Mackay, where over a period of time it sort of fell apart, and then it was put into a paddock, and then it went into a scrapyard, and then we came across it, and we were able to purchase it, and we brought it down to Malang, where we did a cosmetic restoration, and that is now on display there. Kids can climb up on it, and we've put a string there which they can pull, and that sounds a whistle, and the loco starts chopping away. So it's pretty popular with kids. We also, inside the railway centre, have a steam driving simulator, which is pretty popular. On the left-hand side, you can see the Ruston diesel that I mentioned before, and that's out on display that particular day. Now, we couldn't use that for train rides because it lacked safety equipment, and At the time that photo was taken, our railway was just a flat out and back track. But since then, in last February, we completed a full circuit. It goes down a hill, round and back up a hill and back to the station. And that required greater power. So we went out and we purchased a locomotive. It was a simplex locomotive. Now, during World War I, they used light railways to take munitions to the trenches. And they couldn't use a steam loco because the enemy would see the smoke. So the British government let a contract to get some small internal combustion engines made, and this was the result. The Motor Rail Company in Bedford, UK, won the contract, and they produced these locomotives, which were called simplex locos. The Aussies called them tin turtles for obvious reasons. They were petrol powered, and they had 3 levels of armour protection. The one there is the highest level, where the driver could close all those doors and be completely protected. And there were two lower levels of protection for use further away from the front line. Those locomotives were so good, they kept making them for another 60 years. The only major change was in the 1920s. They replaced the petrol engines with a 2-cylinder Dorman diesel. But otherwise, they were basically the same all the way through for the next 60 years. Now, one of those is this one, Simplex number 21575, which was built in 1957. And that operated at the Playstone Mill in Mackay in Queensland. That photo was taken in 1966. The loco was retired in 2000 and was sold to Russell Savage in Queensland, who set it aside for restoration, but that never happened. One thing he did do was to remove the cab. The reason being that the cab was okay if you were a very flexible youngster, but for people of our age, it was almost impossible to get in and out. You actually had to stick your head out through the window and maneuver your back end onto the seat. So Russell did the wise thing and actually removed that cab. We came across it a couple of years ago when it looked like that. You see it's got a seat on the front. That's a late addition at the sugar factory, presumably for an assistant to sit for weed spraying, or maybe the shunted mate sat there, but it's proved very useful later in life. So we purchased that, and one of our volunteers restored it in his backyard. And that's how it looks today. We use it on our free train rides, and it runs very well. It actually won a national award for that restoration. You can see how we use the seat at the front now. We have some young lads who are trainee guards, and we train them in railway procedure and what flags to wave when, and they jump down and change the points when necessary. So that's fully operational today. It's fun to drive because you have to use all 4 limbs to drive it. Your right hand works the brake. Your right foot stays on the dead man's pedal, so that if you drop dead, the loco will stop. Your left foot works the clutch, and there's no synchromesh, so you've got a doubly clutch. And your left hand works the forward and reverse, the gears, and the throttle. So it's really fun to drive using all 4 limbs. Much better than the battery loco where you just press a button and it goes. This is a video of that loco being started. The guy in the photo is Neville Thomas. He's the guy who restored it. Now, this is internals of the Light Railway Centre as it is today. as you can see, it's full. We love restoring things, bringing them back to life. And we've now run out of room. So recently we applied for a state government grant to extend our light railway centre, and we got a grant of $18,000 to do exactly that. And in the new year, we will be extending the floor area by 40%. We also recently had a model railway exhibition, which raised a further $7,000, which we intend using to acquire and restore additional rolling stock. So we're looking for exhibits. If anybody knows of any light railway exhibits that might be available for acquisition or on loan, then we would love to hear from them. You can contact us at that email address, or if you just use your search engine to search for Malang Railway, you'll find us that way. And that's it. That's our story. Any questions?
Peter, Bill Hanks, you talked earlier about the quarry tramways, and I remember in the early days of visiting Adelaide with my parents, which is late 50s through into the sort of middle 60s, and the thing that was always pointed out to me, that there was no wooden houses. They were all brick or stone.
Yeah, that's right.
Because there just wasn't the forests around there for the timber.
That's right.
Bill and Peter, could I just ask you to stop the sharing for a minute, please, so we can get you on the screen fully? Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Very few wooden houses in Adelaide.
Yeah. And it really gave the whole city, the greater city, a character of its own.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was quite interesting.
Unfortunately, there's a fair bit of corrugated iron as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of nice stonework. Yes.
Yes, yeah, it certainly was. Yeah. Just what you've shown us of the museum, and that means I've got to have another trip to South Australia.
Yeah, there's quite a bit to see. I mean, we are open at weekend afternoons, but we'd be happy to open the museum anytime for a light railway member who, as long as you contact us beforehand, we can certainly open up for you, and we might even let you sweet talk us into driving a loco.
Oh, all right. Thank you.
It's called driver training.
Understand that. Yeah.
Bill, Richard Whitehead has got his hand, and someone else has got the hand up to ask a question, I think. Let's go to Richard first.
Yeah, mine's not actually a question. It's actually just to maybe correct a couple of items. The converted Morris Minor, I actually think was a Morris Oxford. The bonnet and grille are too big for a Morris Minor. And secondly, the missile was a Bloodhound missile. Was eventually trailer mounted and used by the RAF.
Okay. I'm not sure about both of those because I used to be in the British Army, and I'm pretty sure that was a Thunderbird.
Anyway, it was actually used by the RAF regiment rather than the RAF.
Yeah, certainly they used the Bloodhound, but the Bloodhound was ramjet powered. Now, if you look at that photo, there are no ramjets on it. So I think it's a Thunderbird. Sorry to disagree.
I defer to your knowledge. I mean,
okay. Right, who's next?
We have another hand up somewhere. Jeff from Warragul.
Yeah, hi. Just talking about jetty tramways. I remember when there used to be one on the jetty at Port Macdonald, and there was a trolley that was hand operated, just pushed out to the head of the jetty where the fishermen used to, the cray boats used to come in and load their cray pots onto the trolley, and then they would be pushed back down the jetty. But the last time I was there, I think the track's been lifted and there's no sign of that tramway or that railway at all now. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, I'm not. I haven't been there, so I don't know.
Okay.
Mm.
Also, in one of those photos, that weird-looking locomotive with the two drums on top of it. I don't really know there was an old friend carrier behind, looks like a friend carrier anyway, behind in the photo.
Okay, I've noticed that.
Yeah,
Right.
it's definitely there. I recognise the suspension.
Yep.
No. Yeah. Yeah, Bob Stonehouse has got a hand up. Unmute.
Bob, just push your space bar, please. Just and hold it down. Hold the space bar down.
go.
That's it.
Sorry
Right.
about that.
Right.
Right,
Now restart.
I'm intrigued. Okay, thanks, Bill. Thank you. Firstly, thank you very much for a very educational program this morning. I really enjoyed it. Really interesting. Very good geography lesson. I was intrigued about the horse-drawn tramways and so forth. This is, I'm afraid it's a mirror image of the Locomotive Club of Great Britain journal. So you look at that in a mirror image. That's the Fintona horse tram in Ireland. Apparently, one of the people on board is one David Rollins, who came to live in Australia when Flying Scotsman came out for the bicentennial in 1988. He lives somewhere up in Queensland. There's apparently a steam railway around there.
Okay.
And the other thing about horse-drawn vehicles, of course, is the Isle of Man, where there is still, as far as I'm aware, a horse-drawn tram along the seafront at Douglas.
That's correct.
I think the horses do a round trip or something like that, but it's all very interesting. And there's something else, Bill, if I may just come in here with something in addition to this. The Locomotive Club of Great Britain will, in the new year, be starting a series of Zoom meetings. The first one will be February the 5th, but I think the time we come to transmit, it would be February the 6th to you. I will be forwarding the link as soon as I can to the Light Railway Research Society of Australia, so that you can take part in the meetings we have. I think it's the first Thursday of the month, so it'll be the early Friday morning for you. I'll send the link. The first link, the first one will be Colin Meal, a very well-known member of Locomotive Club of Great Britain, well-travelled, including Australia, and he will be presenting a talk on the last steam in the UK and early adventures abroad to seek out steam. I can send the link and the exact details, and that will be as in return for the compliment that the Light Railway Research Society of Australia has extended to me in being allowed to participate in your meetings. I will forward the details in due course. But it's just this amazing technology allows me to take part here, 10,000 miles away. And I appreciate it very much. So that's returning the compliment. And Peter, thank you very much for a very informative talk this morning. I think there are several British parallels, but it's been an eye-opener. Thank you very much indeed.
All right. Thank you, Bob. Peter Evans. Spacebar.
Spacebar, Peter.
Spacebar doesn't work. I'll use the proper unmute. Thank you for your presentation. The BEV at Alexandra ex Smithfield is now operational courtesy of one of our volunteers who's an electronic engineer, but it hasn't been cosmetically treated yet. So it looks a bit grotty, but it runs.
Right. Very good.
Yeah. Anyone else? No. Peter, another question for myself. Whyalla to Iron Knob? Do you consider that one of your 700 tramways?
No. Consider that as a mainline railway.
Right. It's privately owned, though, isn't it?
Well, by BHP, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm not sure where they draw the line, but personally, I mean, use big steam locos. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the definition is, where you draw the line.
Yeah, I think for a while it was private, industrial, and quirky.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Anyway,
It was also officially a tramway.
right.
Was officially a tramway. When the BHP got their 282 Baldwin locomotives around about, I think it was 1915, they had something like Iron Knob Tramway written on the tender. I think they were the biggest, heaviest steam locos in Australia, and they were steam tramway locomotives officially.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Any more questions? No. You're all getting shy. Peter, you've done a very good job. You filled the head with new knowledge. You've done very well. Unless there is no other questions, thank you very much for a very entertaining presentation. Very well presented. And on behalf of the Light Railways Council, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Please come and visit us at mine.
I'm going to have to do that. Mike, have you got anything?
No, I got in early on the next meeting because we usually lose a handful or two straight after the presenter stops speaking. So I got in before they could disappear on me. So I'm all good. Thanks, Bill.
Yeah, I've seen a few more thumbs up.
No.
No?
I think they're thumbs up saying they enjoyed it. That's what that means.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thumbs up. We enjoyed it.
Yeah.
All right. If that's it, thank you very much, everyone, for attending tonight. And it was interesting to get Bob Stonehouse's invitation to join in on the Zoom meeting in the UK. We'll have to look forward to that as well.
Forward the link as soon as possible.
Yeah. Now, what time of night over there is it going to be?
Say again, sorry?
No, 7:30, I would think.
Yeah. Well, we'll probably be sitting down for breakfast or something.
We can have an early morning coffee.
It would be 6:30 a.m. in our summertime,
Yeah.
but unfortunately 4:30 a.m. in our wintertime.
Yes.
A very early breakfast. To be
Yeah,
had by
so I attend some of the Railway Correspondence and Travel Society meetings, and they're also at 7:30 on
Correct.
Thursday nights.
Or
So they're very inconvenient in winter.
Frank's speaking about Victoria and New South Wales, which brings in another
yes.
complication. So
Yes.
if you're in Queensland, you can make it another hour earlier. If it's in South Australia, I think it's a half an hour later. Northern Territory, I think it's the same. Western Australia, well, it could be anything.
Yeah. Well,
3 hours, 4 hours.
as long as the meetings are recorded, then we can look at them at a suitable time. Yeah. All right. If that's it, thank you very much, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you again in 2 months' time. All the best, a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you all.
Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah.
All the very best. Cheers. Thank you.
Night all.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone.